Good morning, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and today we're going to be once again looking at the house map in the interactive version. Washington has actually passed its house map, so that is going to be as soon as I get to that. I'm going to pull off a tab to the side to make sure that I have. Yeah, that's pretty bad. I think I saw those. Okay. So that way I have the partisanship. Figures. Though this is not, of course, the end-all be-all forecast, and I'm going to be periodically updating this. And for once, I'm actually doing a house map. And I know in the past I've said that house maps are very fluky. It's very difficult to actually 100% determine whether or not a house map is going to, whether a house seat is going to flip or, you know, various different things. But the truth is that in a lot of cases, seats are generally considered pretty safe. For example, if we look at Alabama, yeah, it's pretty safe all around. Going to Alaska, which only has one seat. I have it in the likely category, which for me is perfectly reasonable. Arizona is an interesting map if we go to Arizona. And that the fourth is right in that zone where, yeah, it could certainly go Democratic. And especially with the Democratic incumbent, that will help. But the truth is, in a Republican favorable environment, which it's still going to likely be, and with it seeming like Hispanic voters are actually trending towards the Republican Party, I think there's some estimates that say that 55% of Hispanic voters in the Virginia gubernatorial election voted for Youngkin, which I think that's a little bit excessive, but the low 40s wouldn't surprise me. It just wouldn't. The low to mid 40s would not surprise me. Because I think that Youngkin would have won by a lot more if Hispanics really did go to him by those margins. But, yeah. So I genuinely think that Republicans could very well. I should probably put that there. I don't know why I had the sixth much more, but the incumbent there, Ann Kirkpatrick, is not going to run for re-election, and therefore is going to be much more likely to flip. So Republicans could get a very nice benefit out of Arizona. Arkansas, pretty safe to say that's all safe Republican. And they actually made the map a lot nicer because the old map, the district that has Fayetteville, Arkansas, in the third, was ugly as all get out. Then we've got California, which is, it's a nightmare because of just how big of a state it is and just how safe most of these seats are for the Democratic Party. And I still pretty much stand by my prediction for these as it stands, so I'm just going to move on. Colorado, yeah, I mostly stand by that. The 8th could certainly be won by a Republican. So could the 7th, to be honest with you. Definitely 2 competitive seats. So I think this is an entirely fair map. Connecticut's map has not been released yet. Delaware, I think I've categorized as likely. Yeah. Which I think is pretty fair. Florida hasn't passed theirs yet. Georgia has, though it is in litigation. I think it's going to wind up going to Supreme Court, maybe. And they're just going to leave it because, to be honest, unless you're just purposefully snaking around communities and all that, getting rid of or creating another, majority black district is going to be actually pretty difficult, and that would violate a lot of compactness laws. Though, to be fair, that's not compact, that's not compact, that's not really compact, and neither is that. Though there is a very interesting race in the 2nd, and in a Republican favorable year, I'm actually going to downgrade that to tilt. I still think the Democrats are going to win it, but it is certainly, for once, actually it's an election it's a seat that could flip. The leading Republican candidate there has been getting a decent amount of attention, so that'll be interesting. Hawaii, let's not make two ways about it. It's a safe state for Democrats, just as Idaho is its counterpart, right? And we'll go to Illinois, where I think maybe I'm a bit bullish on the Republicans, but given that the 13th district is going to be an open seat, and it is a Republican favorable environment, and the rural areas in between East St. Louis, Alton, Springfield, and some of these other towns, those are going to be much more likely to continue trending towards the Republicans. So I think that's just a bad combo, and it's kind of actually backfire. As for the 17th, kind of the same thing. Illinois is kind of lagging behind the other Rust Belt states in its rural population swinging towards the Republican Party. And I think there's also going to be some backlash because Democrats there for years and years and years campaigned against Republicans and campaigned against gerrymandering, and then what's the first thing they do? This abomination of a map. And I actually even think the 14th legitimately has a chance of flipping as well, though I will be downgrading the 14th and the 17th just to be a bit more fair in my assumptions of the election. This certainly could be an election where the Republicans only get 3 seats. I'm not gonna criticize you if you say that, is pretty much what I'm saying. And I'm going to take pause here and say, if you like the content, likes, comments, subscriptions, they always do help. I do greatly appreciate them, and it does help the channel grow, and it helps me in the algorithm. Moving on to Indiana. Yeah, this is pretty fair. Don't disagree with it. Iowa, I think I've said that we should be generally erring on the side of incumbents, but this could absolutely, and I'm going to say this, Iowa doesn't look to be getting any less Republican. And it's a case of a lot of rural areas still have ways to go in becoming more and more Republican. if you look at Iowa, in terms of its rural-urban divide and the fact that population is relatively evenly split in these, I genuinely believe that Iowa has the potential to become eventually a safe Republican state, like an R+20 state. It legitimately has that potential, just because your big cities of Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Davenport, and Dubuque, they're not that gigantic. So now we move to Kansas, which doesn't have a map as of yet because their governor vetoed it, but Kentucky does. And let's just be honest, the first, second, fourth, fifth are all safe. I don't honestly think that the sixth is going to be all that competitive. And the third is super safe Democratic, because that is literally just Louisville. Move to Louisiana, which does not have a map, but their maps are going to be... You want to see some ugly maps, look at some of the ones they've drawn. Steve Scalise's district is particularly ugly. I kind of agree with that. I'm going to stick with that for Maine right now. Maryland, this one is also currently in litigation, and I think it honestly probably has a reasonable chance of being overturned. But I will be downgrading the 6th district and the 2nd district to likely, just because they are far less Democratic leaning than those districts were under the 2010 maps. So, yeah. Of course, the first is a lot less Republican than it used to be. And the reason for that is because the Maryland Democratic Party decided that it was a good idea to, while admittedly cleaning up some of the border gore that they drew, they still left some in and created some new stuff. They decided to, instead of going for this more conservative part up here, throw in this very liberal part right here. Massachusetts, I'm not going to pretend that it's anything other than a full safe Democratic map. Though the district here, the 9th, could have a surprisingly close margin if we're going strictly by partisanship. Because Cape Cod and a lot of the stuff that attaches to Cape Cod, so this part, right, is a lot less Democratic than the rest of the state. And of course, this district is extremely Democratic. So the Boston district is extremely Democratic. All of them are extremely Democratic, but this one is at least reasonably interesting. The first is interesting too. But the only real Republican base is like right around this area of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We go to Michigan, and again, that's another very interesting one where they've decided to put Grand Rapids, the into a different district, whereas the old map had that as in a relatively safe, well, not a safe Republican area, but a pretty Republican area. And there's definitely opportunity for the Republicans to make some gains here. For example, flipping the 7th, which is more Republican leaning than the 8th. But outside of Detroit, it could be a very bad, very, very bad cycle for the Democrats here in Michigan. They could walk away with literally only 4 seats. But I'm going to leave this as it stands because I don't think there's been enough to change. Minnesota is still debating on a map. Mississippi, we've got a new map, but like many states in the Deep South, it's pretty easy as long as you know where the districts are and who's... Yeah, historically speaking, the 2nd has been pretty heavily Democratic because it is the majority-minority district, so that makes plenty of sense. And, of course, the entire eastern part of the state is very, 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 very Republican. Then we go to Missouri, which doesn't have a map yet. Soon to be, but it's probably going to be a 2-8. I still agree with my Montana. I don't think that's that crazy to say, because Montana is pretty heavily Republican state, but the new 1st district is has potential to be competitive over the next 10 years. We go to Nebraska. Following my rule of not going against incumbents here, I think Bacon certainly can win re-election. But it is a little bit interesting if we look at the old map. It did make this seat a little bit more Republican-leaning based off of partisanship, but we'll see if that matters. Nevada, this one is actually in litigation right now. And I think the Democrats, like I said, they got too cute, and they could be facing a wipeout. Think I'm going to give I'll give the Democrats the benefit of the doubt and upgrade this for them for right now until I see more polling. But there's also the potential, if Hispanic voters continue to trend towards the Republicans, all of these could very well go for the Republican Party. And that would be pretty bad. New Hampshire doesn't have a map yet, which is a little bit shocking for me. And then New Jersey, we've got this... probably the worst gerrymander I've seen in a long time, because non-contiguous district. I would argue that the 2nd is non-contiguous, and therefore the map needs to be thrown out and redrawn. The 6 is almost non-contiguous. No, this is just, it's a disgusting map. And this one absolutely needs to be thrown out. It is still in litigation, so we'll see. But I think I reasonably stand by this... I reasonably stand by this map, so... Moving over to New Mexico. This is a case where I don't know if rural Hispanic voters really are shifting. Well, they are shifting towards the Republican Party. It's becoming, again, a case of urban-rural divide. But we will obviously see whether that matters. I think this is pretty reasonable, though there is opportunity because of the way the Democrats drew the map, for them to have accidentally given themselves given the Republicans a 2-to-1 map, at least for 2 years. I think it's certainly possible. Then we go to New York, which is a brand new congressional map, which the Democrats have, sad to say, butchered. They've made... Well, Rochester has the potential to be competitive, but I don't think it will be. Buffalo, when I say has the potential to be competitive, it could have a small swing towards the GOP to make it look like it was competitive. Have a closer margin. But it's still a very heavily Democratic seat. Same thing with Buffalo, but Buffalo is a little bit less favorable for the Republicans because more densely populated. Rochester, a lot of the suburbs and rural areas surrounding the city have been included. 24th. Those are all reasonably safe with partisanships of R plus 20 or more. I am a little bit shocked that it's not in litigation. And right now, this district is centered on, I want to say, Ithaca, but it's got a lot of legacy Democrats. Again, this is a case where a lot of populations that would normally vote for Republicans are still voting for Democrats in New York. So there's definitely potential for this map to backfire on the Democrats as well, especially with the way they split up Albany. But I'm going to err on the side of incumbents there, except for the 19th. The 19th, I actually think, could very easily flip to the Republicans, which would be kind of hilarious for me to see that. And also the 18th, but that one is starting to leak over into the New York metro area. And the 17th, I'm going to keep that as leaning towards the Democrats for right now. That's reasonable. Though you can make the argument that that isn't contiguous, but I don't think that's a fair argument in this case. The first, which is weirdly over here rather than what used to be the old... Well, that could very well flip, so I'm going to put it here. The second, they've effectively created a safe Republican district. The third, I'm going to keep that leaning for the Democrats. We go down to the next part. Also, I'm going to keep the fourth leaning. And the 16th is pretty safe Dem. Again, just looking at the partisanship. Then we zoom in on New York City proper, where the only used to be... Okay, this is an abomination. This is not even close to contiguous. And I think that's actually something that could get this map in trouble, is Staten Island is an exception to the rule. And I'm actually going to put that as a tilt Dem just because it's going to be a Republican favorable environment with a Republican incumbent on Staten Island. They basically swapped a few boroughs, a few neighborhoods that are very Republican leaning over here for Democratic leaning ones instead. But yeah, this is there's some sketchy stuff on this map. The 10th in particular, there's some, the 14th, the 3rd, which, yeah, there is potential that this one could get litigated. We go down to North Carolina, which I believe, no, that one wasn't reinstated yet. I think that one has to be redrawn. Ohio, I'm going to skip over North Dakota because that's pretty safe Republican. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. Ohio got, had their map get nuked. Oklahoma, yeah, I agree with that. They pretty much made it all Republican. Go over to Oregon, where maybe I was a bit bold in saying that the 6th could flip towards the Republicans. I'm actually going to put that as tilt Dems, but in a Republican favorable environment, I genuinely think that one could flip. The 5th absolutely has the possibility of flipping, and I would not be shocked if it does. However, I am going to downgrade it to a tilt because I'm going to give the incumbent a bonus. Pennsylvania still hasn't approved of theirs. Rhode Island hasn't approved of theirs. South Carolina has. I think I've even looked at it now. At least on this overview. No, I have not. Well, the short answer is safe Republican except for the majority-minority district. South Dakota, one district, and we've talked about it. We go over to Tennessee, which is another map that has been finalized. We put in the 9th, aka Memphis, as safe for the Democrats. Pretty obvious. And the rest of the state is pretty safe for the Republicans. There used to be a Dem district in Nashville, right up in here, but they've split the city. I'm shocked this one's not been put into litigation. Texas. And this is legitimately where, yeah, the Republicans have made some very ugly districts. But in general, kind of makes sense. And yeah, this is not so good. Speaking of, there is absolutely the possibility that the Republicans could flip Cuellar's district, especially if the Rio Grande continues to trend towards the Republicans. This could wind up being a much better map for the GOP than they were expecting. But I'm going to leave it at that because I don't think it's fair until we start seeing more generic ballot polling as well as the campaign really get underway. Skipping over Vermont because one district, and let's be 100% honest here, Democrats are not going to win that. I genuinely think Spanberger could lose that district. And the rest of it, I don't really think that the 1st or the 5th are going to be all that competitive, especially in a Republican favorable environment. The 2nd, not contiguous, but with the Eastern Shore, you kind of have to deal with it. The 3rd could get called out for that, but if you're trying to keep communities of interest together, Norfolk and Hampton Roads are vaguely one community. And it's much more easy, especially when, and of course, you have to deal with the VRA aspect of it. So, the 10th has the possibility of flipping too, which is interesting, but I don't think it will. But I think the Republicans could wind up with a congressional majority in Virginia, which is really weird to say because, but it has to do with basically where do people live, and how self-sorted are they. Washington, like I said, Washington has finalized its maps. 270 to win just hasn't caught up, and the rest of the maps are unfinished. So if we go back to the national overview, we'll see that as it stands right now, there's still 127 seats left to be finalized. And the Republicans right now would have a 4-seat advantage of the ones that I'm predicting. Though there's obviously room for disagreement, by the way. And if you want to disagree, feel free. We've, of course, got Louisiana, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Missouri, Kansas, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Washington has been finalized. New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And looking at the maps for them, Republicans are going to have an edge in these districts that are left to be finalized. Certainly in Florida, certainly in Louisiana, North Carolina, yeah, Ohio, yep. Believe it or not, Pennsylvania, yep. I think I said Missouri, Kansas, absolutely. Wisconsin, more than likely. Minnesota is probably going to be an even split. Washington, the Republicans have an opportunity for 4 districts. They have a potential opportunity, if things break absolutely perfectly, for them to actually take control of Washington's congressional delegation, which is extremely weird. But if everything breaks absolutely perfectly, they could. It won't, but it is a mathematical possibility. And then Connecticut and Rhode Island certainly not. Republicans might get a seat out of Connecticut. Probably not, though. So, but there we have it. Right now, an updated U.S. House map. Take it easy, y'all. Have a very, very, very nice day. And again, likes, comments, subscriptions always do help, and I greatly appreciate it. Have a very nice day.